Hello, everyone. Welcome CSA Talks. Today, we're hosting the legendary Ozan Varol'u, and he's a great guy. I'm sure if you check his background, you're going to agree with me. Ozan is he's a rocket sciences Turner Award-winning professor, and he's the author of the book, and the book name is Think Like a Rocket Scientist. And Ozan, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be speaking with you.
Yeah, it is a pleasure having you today, and I'm sure everyone is, would like to ask many questions about your background and what kind of advices you can share with us. But we have very limited time, therefore I'm going to ask you only 3 questions. The first one is about your book. Actually, you worked in a program in March 2003. Explorations, rovers missions. And would you please share with us one principle that you can share with the audience about how rocket scientists approach problems that we can apply in our lives?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, I worked on the operations team for the 2003 Mars Exploration Rovers project, which sent 2 rovers to Mars in 2003. Their names were Spirit and Opportunity. We built them to last for 90 days, but Opportunity ended up lasting for over 15 years on the Martian surface and became one of the most successful interplanetary missions of all time. And one of the things, so I share about 9 strategies that we can all use from rocket science in my book, Think Like a Rocket Scientist. But one of the principles that come to mind that I'd love to share with the audience is first principles thinking. So first principles thinking is a concept from physics. It's a way of distilling a complicated system down to its fundamental subcomponents. So it's a way of eliminating assumptions in your life until you're left with those. So letting go of everything except for what is essential. And often we don't do that. Often we're doing things not because it's the best way to do something, but it's because that's how we've done it in the past. Like we've always done it that way. Or other businesses, other competitors around us are doing it a certain way. So we just assume that that is the best way to do something. But often the businesses and the people that get ahead in life tend to be the ones that put a question mark at the end of conventional wisdom and say, why are we doing it this way? And is there a better way forward? So one of the examples from rocket science that I give in my book is from SpaceX. So SpaceX made headlines in 2020 when they became the first private company to put astronauts into orbit. And just to set that accomplishment in context, only 3 governments have been able to do that in the past. So US, Russia, and China. And SpaceX, this relatively new private company, beat everybody else, including established companies like Boeing, to the finish line. And one of their secrets is their ability to question assumptions. So one assumption they questioned is so rockets were not reusable for a very long time. So they deliver their cargo into orbit, and then once they put their cargo into orbit, they would burn up in the atmosphere or plunge into the ocean, requiring an entirely new rocket to be rebuilt. Now imagine for a moment doing the same thing for commercial flights. Like I'm in Portland, Oregon right now, you're in London. I fly from Portland to London. The passengers leave the plane. Someone steps up to the plane and just lights it on fire. Sounds ridiculous, but that's what we did for rockets for decades. And so SpaceX and also Jeff Bezos' space company, Blue Origin, have questioned that assumption and said, well, can we reuse rockets? Can we land these rockets back on Earth to be refurbished and reused like airplanes? I mean, airplane flights are so much cheaper because airplanes are reused over and over again. And so now we have a landing pad next to the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And that's because these 2 companies have been able to use first principles thinking and question assumptions. And there are so many examples of this outside of rocket science as well. You know, we used to assume that video rentals, for example, required a physical store and late fees. Questioning those assumptions gave us Netflix. We used to assume that you needed a bank loan or venture capital funding to be able to start a new business. Questioning that assumption gave us Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So I find it useful to look back at my life and from time to time ask, what am I doing simply because I've done it in the past? Or what am I doing because other people around me are doing it? And then can I question that assumption and replace it with something better?
Oh, it's very impressive. Everything is changing nowadays, and the rule of the games are being changing, and we need to adapt ourselves accordingly.
Yeah, for sure.
There is one question I would like to ask you. In today's business life, we all have the same problem, actually. We call it like sustainability. We set goals in the, beginning of the year. We say, okay, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to read a book every month, and I will start making gym. But at some point, we give up. We do not continue, and something interrupt our plans, and we lose our motivation. When I look your career, and I see one very important and crystal clear thing, that you don't have any problem with sustainability. What is your inner motivation? Can you give us a recipe? How can you manage to keep your sustainability alive?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of things that I found useful. Number one is when we set these momentous goals for ourselves. So to give an example from my personal life, so writing Think Like a Rocket Scientist, for example, the goal seems really big. And I remember when I first started writing the book, like I had an item on my to-do list that just said write book. And write book is terrible, right? Like, because you don't know what to do next. So I find it really helpful to take a momentous goal like write book and then break it down to its smallest subcomponents. So like, write introduction, write subsection 1 of chapter 1, or research this issue. I think often we don't get started, or we find it hard to keep going on these big projects because we don't know what the next action item is. We don't know what to do next. And so breaking down those big goals into really clear steps, I find very, very helpful. The other thing I find helpful is to zoom out and ask myself, to the extent I'm having trouble sustaining something, say like going to the gym or reading a book every week, as you said, and I step back and ask myself, like, why is this goal here to begin with? Like, what is my long-term vision here? Why do I write an article every week, which is what I do? And when the going gets tough, it's important for me to remind myself of why I set that goal to begin with. So to remind myself of the long-term vision, of the long-term benefit that this is going to bring me. Because often I think we lose ourselves and we're like, well, we're too busy to go work out, or we're too busy to read a book. And reminding yourself of the long-term importance of why you set that goal is really, really helpful. I also find it helpful to tie things to specific habits or routines I already have. So writing for me, for example, is something I always do in the morning. So it's, like I wake up, I make coffee, and then I start writing. It's in that sort of rhythm. And so I don't have to get up in the morning and think to myself, oh, what do I do today? Mm-hmm. That decision has already been made. I'm going to be writing in the morning. And so that I find helpful. And then one more thing, I find it helpful to remind myself, there's this saying I love, I read it in a book somewhere, or a question actually, am I fighting the alligators or am I crossing the swamp? Mm-hmm. So fighting alligators is what we do on a daily basis. Like we're answering emails, we're moving from one notification to the next, we're moving from one meeting to the next, but we're not actually crossing the swamp. Like we're simply just staying in the same place and fighting the alligators. So when I find myself getting distracted, I ask myself, wait a minute, am I just fighting the alligators here, or am I making meaningful progress in crossing the swamp? Is what I'm doing actually moving the needle? And an important part of sustainability, I think, is also letting go of what is no longer serving you. So yeah, sustaining on the things that are important, but also letting go of things that are not important, that are not of service to your long-term vision and your long-term goals. We were talking about this before we started recording, but I've been an academic now for 10 years. I got tenure, became a full professor. And most people in my profession do that for the rest of their life. And I decided this year to make this my last year in academia. So I will no longer be an academic at the end of the semester. And a lot of my colleagues and a lot of people look at that decision and say, that's crazy. You know, why would you give up a tenured position? You have a guaranteed salary for the rest of your life. But for me, teaching law was getting in the way of the things that bring me more meaning and more joy. And so letting that go gives up room for me to actually sustain the projects that are really important to me, to write my next book, to do more keynote speaking in front of different audiences. Those are the things that are bringing me meaning and joy at this point of my life. And so for me to be able to sustain them long term, I need to let go of what's getting in the way.
I'm really impressed, you know. I applaud your courage, because it's not that easy to giving up from your career that you built and you spent your 10 years. I don't know what to say, and you know, I'm sure the people who are watching us at the moment will check their own life and they will question themselves, can they change something in their life? At this point, there is one question I ask myself time to time. If you would have a time machine and if you go back 10 years, what would you do differently? Because there are some audiences 10 years younger than us that maybe your tips can be helpful for them.
Yeah, for sure. I love time travel. Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies. So I love this question. I think if I could go back 10 years and talk to my younger self, I would tell him to take action more quickly. Because there are things that I've thought about doing for a very long time. So starting a blog, a podcast, and a public platform, for example, it's something I started to think about maybe 7, 8 years ago, or maybe it might even be longer than that. But I waited until 2016 to finally start doing it. And I think I had this, you know, I'm a very sort of left-brain person. I was considering the pros and cons and sort of what's the cost benefit, what's rational, what's not. And I think a lot of fear was getting in the way too. Like, what if I launch this public platform and it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if other people point and laugh at me? And I let a lot of that get in the way, and I waited too long, I think, to take action. So I think my advice to my younger self would be to just take action faster, because you know what? Like, if it doesn't work out, you can just go doing something else. A lot of the decisions that we make in life tend to be two-way decisions. So you can try something new, and if it doesn't work out, you can go back to what you were doing before. And in my position, especially when I already had a full-time job, I could have started blogging or starting my podcast or writing a book on the side without giving up my career. And if I liked it, which is what ended up happening, then I could always transition out. And if I didn't like it, I could just go back to what I was doing. So that would be my advice. I think it's really hard to determine whether something is going to work until you actually try it. It's only when you try doing it and commit to doing it for a while that you get feedback from other people. And you also can check in with yourself about whether or not you're actually truly enjoying something. It's really hard to think about all of that theoretically. You should certainly do your research before, but you're not going to know for sure until you take action.
Well, it's a perfect answer. Thank you. I think myself, I would do many things differently, actually. But as you say, time is the most limited source in our life, and we need to use it more carefully. Ozan, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to talking to you. I hope we can do it again in the future. And I really wonder about your future career path. Maybe 5 years or 10 years later, we will see you as an astronaut who works in SpaceX. Who knows? And I will be very proud of myself that I made an interview with you.
Thank you so much, Derya. This was so much fun. It was so nice talking to you. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.